Andy, if you can start the stream, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're up and running. Welcome to the Cabinet meeting of the 28th of March for the Vale Glamorgan Council, obviously a remote meeting. I remind you that this has been live streamed as well as recorded for posterity. Can I have the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence, and I see everybody is here. The next item is the minutes of the previous meeting of the 14th of March. Can I have your authority to agree those, please?
And yeah. I'll formally second them, Leader.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest today? I don't think there are, in fact. No. Okay, good. Next item is then some references. We have quite a few of them. The first one is from the Governance and Audit Committee of the 1st of March in relation to the Audit Wales Third Sector Partnership working. It actually came as a reference from Joint Liaison Committee. Clearly, as I think we've had reports before, this advised that the Audit Wales review had focused on examining whether the Council's arrangements with the third sector were effectively supporting the Council to achieve the strategic recovery priorities. Thankfully, in terms of this overall, the report findings concluded the Council's arrangements supported current ways of working, but could be strengthened to maximise opportunities. To enhance the relationship to support the delivery of the Council's strategic recovery priorities. And they identified 4 areas. One is that we should reconsider the checklist, which was attached to the Appendix 1 to the report, whether we should reflect on how we wanted to work with the third sector. Thirdly, consider the level of resources and investment required to achieve a more collaborative way of working. And finally, to consider what actions could be taken to help the third sector adjust to a more collaborative way of working. There had some, they were reported that there'd been some early discussions with the Wellbeing and Future Generations Commissioner, so that's good in moving forward. And it also suggested the establishment of a task and finish group to consisting of council officers and some representatives from Glamorgan Voluntary Services and other third sector organisations. So progress is moving on. I know there was a comment that from the chair about the difficulties and challenges when it came to the creation of the third sector organisation. So it is important that the people were not put off from getting involved or setting up community groups. And I think we've had a good examples during the pandemic of people coming together and helping the community. So basically, when they considered it, the key findings of the Audit Wales were noted by the Governance and Audit Committee, and they referred it to us for endorsement, which indeed I think we will do. Obviously, we'll endorse the action plan and the changes and the suggestions from audit, together with obviously the relevant comments in that it might be a reasonable idea to set up a task and finish group with those listed. So basically, I think we just simply note that the Governance and Audit Committee accepted the Audit Committee's recommendations and suggested a way forward would be a task and finish group. So I think that is a positive way forward, and I would endorse those remarks. If everybody's got any comment in relation to that. Nope. You agreed? Okay, the next item is again from Governance and Audit Committee in relation to the Corporate Risk Register, but this is just for Q3 update. It does provide an overview. A risk analysis was incorporated within the report, which was at Annex A of the report, and the report recommended the Governance and Audit Committee note the Q3 position and refer any comments to Cabinet. There was a conversation and consideration was given to the format of the risk register for future updates, and it was commented on the way in which the risks were flagged up. And while the comment, which I'm not too sure about, but says, well, although being significant risk didn't represent the worst thing that could happen. Obviously, that is the case. It isn't a disaster issue. It is just talking about risks. So clearly, things like this need to be taken in moderation and moderating the risks undertaken at service level, which is the way we would go about it anyway. And indeed, they would be reviewed by the performance teams and by the strategic leadership team. There was also a comment from Councillor Wilson who suggested that the review of the format of the risk register suggested that closer working with the Public Service Board and other agencies took place. And to be honest, I think that's already happening anyway. So basically, as far as the committee considered it, they noted the current position and they made the comments that I've just made. But to be perfectly frank, I think the risk register covers all the areas they mentioned. It obviously looks at all the risks, whether it be small, medium, or large, and obviously some of them are going to be not as effective or would have as much effect on the council as others. And clearly, we still work very closely with the Public Service Board, myself as chair of it, and other agencies. So I think we actually do take reckonance of those issues. So unless anybody's got any comments, I think we should note the comments they make, but we feel that all those issues are adequately covered at the moment. And I think that is the point. They are noted but adequately covered currently. So I would suggest that. Is that agreed?
Yep, and formally seconded. And I formally second the one before as well.
Thank you very much. The next one again comes from a governance and audit in relation to the draft counter fraud policies. The report did outline that one of the core functions of an effective governance and audit committee was to consider the effectiveness of the council's risk management, which is what they looked at earlier on, and the control environment and associated anti-fraud and corruption policies. As you know, the council's updated counter-fraud strategy and framework 21 to 24 was considered by committee on the 30th of December previously too, and the key policies such as anti-fraud, bribery, corruption policy and anti-money laundering policy and the anti-tax evasion policy had been updated. And indeed, I think we've had a report fairly recently to Cabinet in relation to this, and which is why I went to Governance and Audit Committee. And clearly the three policies in relation to this were covered in the report in their Appendix A, B and C of the anti-fraud, bribery and corruption policy, the anti-money laundering policy, and at Appendix C, the anti-tax evasion policy. Obviously, there'd obviously been a query from the consultation with the trade unions, and I think they do have a fair point. In one of the comments that they made was that it was around the development of the whistleblowing policy, which obviously is important in that our staff are key to knowing what's going on, and if they think something is wrong, then they need to tell us. But one thing that was raised is that we probably need to raise the profile of the new policies, because some of them are new, with the staff, so that their consideration can be given to them about its promotion, but also whether or not they feel is an issue. But most importantly, as I see it, this also recognises that staff need to feel protected in terms of anything they report in a confidential manner. And I think that is absolutely perfect. It's the right thing to do. We have to protect our staff, and if they come forward, then we need to protect them in that forward too. So the committee just simply noted the report and passed it on to us for approval, which I would absolutely do. So can I say that we note the reference, that we commend the policies as mentioned and go forward. But also, can I add a recommendation that in terms of these policies, that the head of a regional internal audit service, in consultation with the leader, be given delegated authority to make typographical changes to the policy should they need arise. So basically, it's just a belt and braces. The policies are there. If we need to make any slight adjustments, then that gives us the authority to do that too. But otherwise, we would adopt those policies. And I formally move those recommendations.
Formally second.
Thank you very much. The next item is a reference, this time from the Learning and Culture Scrutiny Committee. It's in relation to the report of the Cost of School Task and Finish group. It was a group which was set up to advise and provide findings to seek approval of the draft good practice guidance, which again was appended to the report at Appendix A. As I said, they established this task and finish group in January 2020 to review the costs to parents and carers of sending their children to school. The report did summarise the work undertaken and presented a draft suggested good practice guidance. The report recommended that the draft guidance be circulated, obviously be approved in the first instance, but then circulated to governors, governing bodies and heads of teachers of all the Vale of Glamorgan schools, and that members did hope that this guidance would offer alternative ideas to schools relating how they could mitigate the cost of schooling and discourage any policies which exacerbated the issue. And I know that Councillor Birch did suggest that this matter should be revisited on an annual basis, and I think that's a very, very good idea. When you could also at that time gather information from governing bodies if they wish to make any. Again, I know Councillor Burnett, the Deputy Leader, made comments in there, and I'm sure she might want to make some more in a second. But basically, they recommended that the report be noted and that the draft good practice guidance be endorsed, subject to amendments by the committee, which I don't think they made any. The report was then referred to us for consideration and approval, which I'm very, very happy to do. And the good practice guidance, subject to approval by us, which I hope we will do today, should be circulated to all governing bodies and head teachers in the Vale schools and be made publicly available on the council's website. I'd like to thank the Task and Finish group for the amount of work they've carried out, because it's clearly an important subject. I don't know if, Liz, you want to come in at this, because I know that you were at this meeting and I know you made some comments.
Thank you, Leedy. Yes, if I could. This is one of those small pieces of work, but it's actually such an important piece of work. You know, I think that we can all talk to older members of our families who missed out on schooling, missed out on reaching their potential because their families couldn't afford school uniforms and equipment. And fortunately, those days have gone. And through cashless sort of free school meal services, that children aren't identified as being in receipt of support. But it's more about young people's ability to fully participate in the school life, whether they get into trouble because they haven't got the right sort of shoes, or maybe there are other sorts of issues, things like school trips and that sort of stuff. Can all our children have the same experience of school going forward? And so I think that this piece of work, this Task and Finish group, will prove to be hugely important in the way in which we support our schools. Although that goes to say a lot of our schools are doing some really excellent work in this area already, and the input of those has been reflected within the Task and Finish group. So I'm totally in support of Scrutiny Committee's recommendations, and that it be circulated to governors and head teachers, and also that it gets reviewed on an annual basis. I would also, one comment I made at Scrutiny is that actually I would love this to be put on the agenda of the Schools Council Network at their next meeting, which I think is in July, to actually allow them to review it, because I know that school councils, Pencoitra for one, which is a very strong school council, have inputted into this. But I actually think that as well as it going to head teachers and to school governors, I actually think that the young people themselves should have something to say about it. So you know, that would be really helpful.
I think that's an excellent idea, and we can add that into the recommendation. And I think probably it is right, because you know, we talk about young people, but young people have a voice too, and they should be heard. So this is one way of doing it. That's good. Okay, I'm happy with that. Does anybody ask any comments? Are we happy to move with those recommendations? Yep, good. Okay. In that case, I'll formally second if Liz was moving it. The next item is a reference on corporate performance, and it's in relation to the annual delivery plan monitoring report for Q3. The report set out to the committee the key points that fell under the remit of that committee. There was positive progress being made, contributed to an overall green status in the plan, and the head of service summarised the achievements organised under the 4 wellbeing objectives. And basically, also they talked about the coronavirus recovery update. In terms of that, the report was presented to them. They were asked for comments and questions. There were some within the report, and I'm not going to go through them, but some of them were talking about investments and it does say counting on some small-scale investments as positive results in their own right, with perhaps only partially improvements, but that's not fully realised. But I think that's a bit cynical in some respects, because sometimes the smallest changes can make the biggest difference. So if we indeed do make any comments, and then, as long as they're positive, I have absolutely no issues with it. And they also talked about the infections increases of and hospitalizations across the UK of COVID-19, and again, that's something which is very relevant at the moment, because I know we've dropped some of the statutory requirements, but I still think there are voluntary requirements in place where you still have to it's up to you, but I think you should wear masks in public places, etc. Because clearly COVID has not gone away. In terms of the recommendations, the performance results were simply noted, and the remedial actions to be taken to address areas of underperformance and to tackle the key challenges identified. The committee's views accepted that. They were noted that there are actions in place, and they noted those too. And they also made some comments in relation to things like, for example, as I said, about counting the small-scale successes, to give positive results. Only partial improvement didn't provide a full context of the background of these measures, but I think if you make changes and if you make improvements, even if they're small ones, I think that's positive. And I don't know what else they needed to know. The other issue was in terms of recruitment of the Shared Regulatory Services, SRS. But to be honest, that's already going on. We know there are difficulties in achieving some posts to be fulfilled, because there are a limited number of those people who are professionally qualified out there. There was also comments in relation to the children's looked after, and further details were requested, which is fair enough, but I know there's work going on with that too. And then there was also a comment about the review of the buildings, street names and monuments, and that the further update would be needed, and that's fine. That's important. And then finally, that they need for a 4th round of vaccinations due the potential need, but for vaccinations due to the rise of COVID-19. But clearly that's ongoing too within health. So all the comments that have been made in relation to those, I'm happy that most of those are asking for comments and reports to their committee, and that's their right, and that's their job in terms of scrutinising what goes on in the council. But I would recommend that we would accept the updated reports, albeit I think they are positive anyway, and I think all the things that have been covered are actually being done. In terms of the vaccinations, that's clearly outside our remit, but I know through meeting with health on a regular basis, then they are ongoing too. So I haven't got a problem with any of these things, but what I would say is if there's any reports go into scrutiny, then they should be coming to scrutiny, come into Cabinet as well. I think there's people who want to make some comments, and Councillor Ben Gray, and then Councillor Eddie Williams. So Ben, will I take you first, please?
Yeah, thanks, Leader, and I share your thoughts on this. I think it's important to note where we've come from in terms of strategic plans, and actually the whole point of the annual delivery plan is to see some tangible things and for people to help understand what the council does. And I think it's great that we're able to showcase all of the different things that are going on. And in terms of the questions raised with regard to children looked after, that was subsequently asked as well at corporate parenting panel, and we'll be reporting back on some of the minutes from that at the next cabinet meeting. But I think in terms of the annual delivery plan, that is a document we own and we share, and scrutiny come back and have questions. And I think it's great that these things are noted. But like you, I'm happy to second noting the comments made in the reports and continue to encourage scrutiny to engage with it, because this is demonstrating what the council is actually doing, rather than just any kind of lofty strategic goals, and we really want to be able to give a sense to the public of what's going on. So I think the annual delivery plan's got a lot of good merit to it, and the way that it's driving forward, understanding what the council's doing, so take aboard all those comments made and understand that they're being followed up anyway. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. They have been. All the issues are covered. Eddie, want to come in, please?
Yeah, I'd just like to concur with what you've commented on, Leader, and also Ben. It's that if members look at the joint SRS committee's minutes, which will be coming through, they'll recognise that it's been an ongoing issue for the SRS. The fact that Wales doesn't have its own development programme for specialist and officers, and hence there's been an initiative that's been set up to do that, and certainly from the head of service has been dealing with that with the Welsh Government and the WLGA with other councils to come up with a national initiative. So you've got to recognise, of course, as well as part of it, is that there's been a shortage of staff within the SRS function because they've been redirected for obviously the recent events in the last couple of years. So, but even so, the Food Standard Agency, who that we required to meet their requirements as well, they recognise that the council is performing within, as it needs to, and we've got a set plan. So the points made, noted, but there is already action in place to deal with those. Thank you.
Yep, I agree. Thank you very much. That they're right to raise them and they're right to scrutinise them, but they ought to be assured the work is already ongoing anyway. So if they can have updated reports, that's even better. Okay, in that case, we accept that we note them, but obviously the fact that it's already been dealt with in many respects. The next item is item 9, which is another reference from Corporate Performance Resources, and that's in relation to Project Zero and an update. This was a reference originally from Cabinet on 28th of February, so I'm not going to go into great depth about it, I don't think. The key points raised were in terms of the Council's carbon footprint, because the Welsh Government undertook a measurement exercise across the public sectors as to use as a baseline. As part of that exercise, we looked at 3 different scopes: carbon emissions, different scopes of carbon emissions, I should say, looking at both direct and indirect use of carbon emitting services, but also we looked to involve any carbon emissions in our supply chain. We also we're looking at with interest to find any findings from the All Wales information the Welsh Government provide, and we'll also be submitting further data as was reported in June of this year. In terms of the funding, there are a series of different funding arrangements in place, and we put some of those in place during our recent budget rounds, such as the Green Infrastructure Structure and Climate Change Reserves. There's the Project Zero Reserve, and also we'll be looking to leverage any grants. In terms of things like housing, over the next 30 years, we're looking to decarbonise our existing stock, but also build future-proof housing, and we're doing that, I think. In terms of schools, we're doing the same thing. In terms of things like the South Point in Roos, and also look at our asset renewal through the capital funding. And obviously, we will be looking at progress through reports to Cabinet and scrutiny 3 times a year. We have a communications plan in place. There are key issues in relation to that, things like the local development plan and the waste management business plan, the green infrastructure plan, and obviously the local energy plan is something we need to look at too. But we'll also undertook to look at our carbon emissions. One of the things we did was we recently undertook a consultation to find out if we could estimate what the carbon emissions across the Vale of Glamorgan were, in order for us to know the size and challenge that are ahead of us. There were some comments in relation to things like the global uncertainty around around energy and supply prices and prices. And obviously it will have an impact. It was in terms of going forward. There was also discussion in relation to Ukraine and other factors, and clearly all these things have been taken into consideration by the senior leadership team and reported here. There was a comment about supply chain, and indeed that's already been considered, as I said earlier on, within our procurement, and we're trying to procure as local as possible wherever we can. There are different areas that we need to look at, and indeed the project board for Project Zero is looking at those all of the time too, and I will be reporting back. I know again, Deputy Leader made some comments, which I just did in terms of things like South Point. There was again, the chair brought up the issue about food, having food locally, and it was accepted that that would be something we'd be looking forward to and looking forward to go forward with, and we're looking to see well procurement and our food miles, I should say. So they recommended that this cabinet be informed about greater emphasis on producing and sourcing food locally. I think we are doing that anyway, but clearly we'll have to continue to do that. But I know the Big Fresh, for example, takes that on board particularly. It talks about greater focus on insulating public and other types of buildings. Well, we're currently doing that. We've got within the business housing plan, we're doing that anyway, and we're always looking to see what we can do within our own buildings. It also suggested us lobbying Welsh Government and UK Government regarding the procurement practices and policies, and moving towards the neutral solutions. Well, yeah, I'm happy to do that, to be honest. But again, I think it starts at home. So what we're doing is more important in some respects, but clearly if we can influence Welsh Government or UK Government, all the better. And the other thing was it asked us to look at to influence practices both in terms of procurement locally and the wider supply chain. Again, it's the same thing they just talked about, and it's something which I think we do take on board. So to be perfectly honest, again, I would note the comments, but again say that most of these things are being covered anyway. I might be being cynical myself, but I think that's the case. If it's not, then tell us where it's not, and we can do something about it, because clearly if there is something that we can do better, then we will do it. I think we're committed to that, hence the reason that we've got all the projects in place. Sorry, I've gone on a bit, but I think it's a case of it's easy to say, it's harder to do. Sorry, Councillor Burnett.
Thank you, Leader. Actually, this is really interesting, because when you actually look at it, this is Q3 performance, and an awful lot of what we've been doing. I mean, while work's been ongoing, an awful lot of what we've been doing is actually sort of amassing all the data and working out where we are and where we need to be. Sometimes that actually makes it even more daunting when you look at where we are and where we need to be, but there is a lot of stuff going on. And you mentioned South Point Primary. That's absolutely brilliant, but the work is ongoing in terms of what schools do we need to rebuild that we can't retrofit, but also what skills do we need, what do we need to be doing to look at our sort of older Victorian schools that might be in an overall good condition, but how do we bring those up to sort of zero carbon levels? An awful lot of stuff looking at that. And you talked about local food. There's already been an awful lot of work in terms of that, and as as Cabinet are already aware, there are ongoing discussions in terms of how do we develop an agri-food hub to service the region. Local businesses, well, if you look at our work with 21st Century Schools or Sustainable Communities for Learning as it is now, and the community benefit stuff, then we actually already measure how many of the sort of contracts go to people, or how much of the employment goes to people from the local postcode, how many of the contracts go to local businesses. And if you look at sort of jobs created in the local postcode, nearly 1,200. So an awful lot of that work is being done because that's our overall ambition. But it's really good to be able to pull it together in this, to be able to say, so how far have we got? and how much further have we got to go? And unfortunately, I think it's fair to say we've got a lot further to go.
Yeah, I agree. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that Scrutiny or anybody else should say, look, what are we doing? Can we have updates? But actually give us some credit for the fact that we're trying to do something, and that this is something which we are ongoing. So it isn't a case of we're not doing anything. So you can criticize us for not doing anything. We are doing as much as possible, and yes, we have to do more. But let's have a bit of reality checks sometimes. Is that we can do what we can do when we can do it, but we need to do it probably faster and probably more efficiently. But this is the beginning of the journey in many respects of some of these things that we put in place. So I would just commend the amount of work that's been carried out already. Particularly, we've taken on Project Zero, we've taken on all that sort of stuff, so that we will do as much as possible. And yes, we do need updates, and yes, you do need challenge, because that's what it's about. But also, you need to give credit for where credit's due. That's all I'm getting at. Right. Anyway, I give them the recommendation. I think that they would note the comments, but say that most of this is going on. But clearly, there has to be more challenge. There has to be more to do. But clearly, we need more updates on a regular basis in order for us to just see where we currently are and see whether there's anything better we can do. Sorry, I just. Sometimes it's easy it's easier to criticize and it's harder to do again. Sorry, it's just one of my foibles, I'm afraid. So are we all happy with what's been suggested?
Yes, and happy to second.
Thank you very much. In that case, I'll go on to item 10, which is the minutes of the Joint Consultative Forum, which is actually quite some interesting comments in relation to this, because there was some good debate, which they noted in essence, but there was consideration of things like the situation in terms of GLAM and in terms of such like diverse staff network, which is really been progressing extremely well. It also talked about the sickness reports, and clearly it does show that the overall sickness is up than it was compared to last year, but I'm not surprised about that in some respects compared to last year. But it's also the same thing within other authorities. In terms of sickness, I think we've been through a particularly hard period at the moment, and indeed a lot of the issues that we're finding at the moment is where everybody's now stopped wearing masks. People are changing, but trying to go back to a new normal, and clearly there's the new variant is there. And although it's not as dangerous, if you want to put a better word, it is more transmissible. And yet we've seen the issues in terms of schools and children and people going back. So that's obviously going to be an issue. So there was quite a good debate on that. Also, in terms of the health and safety wellbeing manager update, and there were some good questions and answers in relation to that. And then finally, they talked about the pension scheme update. And they talked about whether people are in the new scheme or not. I think Peter's going to make a comment in relation to that. And I know they all then finally talked about the Oracle upgrade, which is an internal matter more than anything else. But I think actually it showed that the Joint Consultative Forum is working reasonably well, very well. And basically at this stage, I think we just need to note them. But I think Peter's got some comments to make.
Yeah, if I may, Leader, I agree. It's quite an interesting read. Is this report? But the one I'm focused upon is toward the end. It's the feedback from the Cardiff and Vale pension scheme, and particularly about the member self-service facility that is now available to members of the pension scheme who work for the Vale of Glamorgan. It gives them the opportunity to sort of log on privately with their own privacy and explore what pension they may or may not be entitled to, and when they may or may not be able to retire, and how they may or may not be able to enhance or do whatever And I think that's a very valuable asset and something that, as a previous member of the scheme, I campaigned for a very long time. And the only comment I've got is I was a little bit disappointed that only some 28% of the staff have taken it up. And I anything we can do to promote that take up, I think will only be better. I understand that eventually it'll join up with the government sponsored scheme, which means anyone's pension from any source will all be available from one dashboard. Having seen some of the difficulties of setting up the one for the local government pension scheme, I don't think that's tomorrow's news, but I still think this is a blooming handy asset for our staff, and I would encourage them to take it up.
Okay, good, fair point. In that case, we could note the comments of the jointly consultative forum, and perhaps we could ask HR and payroll to consider putting a note in or sending a note out. Not even. I'm going back to the old days of paper copies now, aren't I? Of pay packets and things. Perhaps we should encourage through the core brief that members are advised about it, and perhaps give a little update of how you can use it, what you can find on it, and to those hard to reach members of staff who are not necessarily on the internet, perhaps we could arrange for something to be given out in a paper form or whatever. Because I take your point, 28% is not a lot, and if you can look, then it's a good way forward. Very good way forward. So I think that we can ask our officers to explore that. I think that's not unreasonable under the circumstances. So if we note that and advise and request that, yes, all agreed. Good. The next item is a very short item. It's the minutes of the Cardiff Capital Region. It's an update report. Most of the stuff was carried out under Part 2, but basically it related to the acquisition and remediation of the former Aberfoyle power station and the final full business case, which we've reported on separately, and we've put out notices elsewhere. Sorry, somebody's just rung my bell. I think it's my granddaughter. Okay, so if we can note the minutes of the Cardiff Capital Region city deal, Cardiff Capital Region minutes. Is that agreed?
And formally seconded.
Thank you. I apologise for that. The next item is the Strategic Collaborative Working Initiative update. As we all know, because we have this on a very regular basis, the collaboration working has increased in response to the challenges of financial climate and in recognition that the value of working in partnership, although some of them are very complex and needs a lot of work to work together. There's also an issue. There's a compendium which is attached to Appendix A to the report, which is the normal way of doing that, and it's an oversight of the way and the collaborative work activity is going on. But following a review of that compendium, it's been undertaken to reflect the changes in some of the partnership activities, becoming actually now part of core business. The report provides Cabinet with a 6-monthly update and captures relevant progress against initiatives. Some of the updates in terms of this, with things like the Public Service Board, where they've been working to produce a new wellbeing assessment for the partnership. There was a couple of themes which came up as part of through the new assessments. Things like, again, common is climate change and nature, deprivation and inequalities, access to services for the rural communities, ageing population, and how to make the Vale Glamorgan a good place to grow old. And the assessment will inform the new wellbeing plan, which will be published in 2023. And the report on the Vale Glamorgan Wellbeing Assessment indeed has been presented to the Cabinet on the 14th of March, so we've already seen that. They're also related to the Regional Partnership Board because that's developed its second population needs assessment for Cardiff and the Vale. There are a number of cross-cutting findings against the themes, and they've been identified through the Regional Partnership Board's action plan. And again, we had a report to that in relation to this on 28th of February. In terms of the Integrated Care Fund, something we were looking to do during our budget setting process. And the Transformation Fund, as we now know, it's been replaced from April with the Regional Integration Fund, and that'll replace those funds. And again, priority schemes aligned to the funding are currently be considered by the subgroup of the Regional Partnership Board. And then finally, not finally, I think there's another one as well, is the Local Government Election Wales Act provides the establishment of new and reformed legislative framework for democracy, governance and elections. But they also put into place the corporate joint committees with the 10 councils in South East Wales and Brecon Beacon National Park. And indeed, we are currently in an interim governance structure, which is twin tracking arrangements with the Cardiff Capital City deal, alongside the enactment of the bare minimum corporate joint committee. And again, we had as far as the interim governance is in place, and that was put in place on the 31st of January 2022, but the work on that will start later in the year. And then finally, the City Region Partnership, as I said earlier from the minutes, acquired the former Aberthorpe Power Station site to remediate, redevelop and reposition the site, maximising its long-term development potential to drive to sustainable, clean economic growth across South East Wales. So there's a lot in you, but those, I think I wanted to talk about those updates because I think they were important, because they are new, but they are cross-cutting, and there's something which we work in partnership with across a lot of our partners, things like the City deal and things like the PSB, and obviously the Regional Partnership Board too. So there's a lot of work going on, and this gives you an update of where we currently are. I prattled on long enough, so there are recommendations. That we consider the strategic collaborative working initiatives that are in place, and that this report be set so we note them and thank the officers for the amount of work being carried out. I'd like to do that, please, and that the report be circulated by email to all available Morgan elect members and members of the Public Service Board for the information. I think, once again, I would also think we need to send this to the town and community councils. Isn't in there at the moment, and I think it should be. It's something I normally add on if it isn't there, but I think it is important that part of our strategic partners are also the town and community councils, so they need to be aware of what's going on. Sorry, I'm going to move those formally. Ben, you'd like to come in, please.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. In addition to formally seconding what you've moved and absolutely agreeing with the addition of community councils, because this is about encouraging those to engage with the regional efforts as well. I think this is a really good report for highlighting just the wide array of stuff that's going on and how a regional footprint changes depending on the subject matter. Our officers have led strongly on the stuff to do with with the PSB. You're an avid member of the City Region deal. As chair of the RPB, I've been heavily involved, but right across the spectrum, the Vale is involved, and this is how we get things done. And I think it's if there's ever a question about what are we doing regionally, this neatly pulls together a wide range of things, and also shows just how complex it would be to simply merge things. And actually this is what we do. We approach things on these different footprints because they make sense there. And there are more than even on this list that are long-standing traditions for working together. So really pleased to second this report and absolutely share it as far and as wide as possible. So I think it's really important that all these organisations work together, and our partners within community councils also engage with some of the efforts and conversations that are happening at places like the RPB.
Indeed, and I think perhaps as you've been thinking about it, we probably need to do it to the third sector as well. Share it with the third sector. I know they're part of the PSB and things, but again, the wider it goes, the better, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there's an additional recommendation around sharing with community councils and our third sector partners through whatever vehicle is best to do that, then I'm happy to support, definitely.
Good, thank you. Everybody happy with that? Good. In that case, we'll move on to item 13, which is the school admission arrangements for 23-24. I think Councillor Burnett, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member, is taking this one.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I think this is today's fastest report, actually. As you'd be aware, the purpose of this report is to advise Cabinet of the outcome of the statutory consultation on the school admission arrangements. This came to us just before that, and we have a statutory duty to consult on school admission arrangements every year and to determine the arrangements for 23-24, so we do it sort of a year in advance, by no later than the 15th of April of this year. In fact, there was only one slight change to the admission arrangements, and that was due to a change in legislation, which is laid out on paragraph 2.5. which is changes to law and admissions as a result of the implementation of the Additional Learning Needs and Education Tribunal (Wales) Act 2018, which aren't currently reflected in this school admissions code. So the council actually received no consultations responses by the closing date of the 11th of February, so we can just go straight to the recommendations. That we consider the report and other appendices included as part of this report, and that we approve the school admissions policy at Appendix A that includes changes to the law on admissions as a result of the implementation of the Additional Learning Needs and Education Tribunal (Wales) Act 2018, which are not currently reflected in the school admissions code. So I therefore move.
Okay. Can I ask a question, because it's just popped into my head, and maybe the monitoring officer would be the person to answer, is it whether or not we need to use the urgency procedure of 1414?
I was just thinking that as I was reading it, I suddenly saw the date and thought, aha, do we need that?
And I think it would probably be wise, because I'm not sure when the next LNR committee is. Not that I think it might be called in there, but this is something we just need to get on with.
Yes, I'd agree with that because of the timelines being so tight. So yes, certainly. Okay,
all right. In that case, if we can add that on, I hadn't spotted that before. I didn't realise it was so quick. Time goes on, I'm afraid. So we're happy with that report. Yeah, good. Thank you. The next item is item 14, which is the Recycling and Waste Management Business Plan and Strategy for 22-23. And again, it's Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood Services, Peter, please.
Thank you there, Leader. Can I first say how pleased I am to present this comprehensive report, all 117 pages of it, recognising that how the council manages its domestic waste is a major factor in us achieving our environmental ambitions under Project Zero, something we started today's meeting making reference to. As Cabinet Member, I am so proud that throughout the pressures of various lockdown initiatives from COVID and whatever, the council's waste management staff have continued to provide our full recycling and waste collection services, such that in 2020 to 21 we recorded a recycling performance of 70.6%, the second highest performance in Wales, and likely one of the highest performance figures in the UK and maybe even the EU. We've achieved this performance due to our change to source segregated curbside recycling, which is the Welsh Government blueprint. And I cannot underestimate this and I can't over-exaggerate the Herculean efforts of our residents. I really do appreciate that. But it should be noted, however, that approximately 1/3 of our residents, those living in Penarth, Dinas and the other Eastern Vale areas, are not yet benefiting from this new recycling arrangements and are still commingling their material. This makes our current position in the Wales League table of recycling even more remarkable. To continue our success, it is extremely important that we properly articulate our vision for the future of domestic recycling service in the Vale. This will enable us to remain on our current trajectory and ensure that as the performance gains become more and more challenging, we work hand in hand with our residents whilst also ensuring that the available funding matches our strategic aspirations. The report before you today advises of the current position and our vision for the next 10 years and the business plan to achieve that vision. If I could take you through some of the report headlines before taking you through the recommendations. The completion of the waste transfer station Atlantic Trading Estate in Barry to allow Penarth and Dinas Powys areas to move to the source segregated recycling later in 2022, completing the recycling collection change programme. The retention of the current waste transfer site in Cowbridge to continue to service Western Vale recycling collections and provide resilience to the service should there be any site or equipment failures at the new site in Barry. The temporary extension of the site contract arrangements for the transfer site in Cowbridge to allow for the new contract to be drafted, that details of this site it will be recorded as for the Western Vale operations and service resilience only and being operated by our directly employed staff. The completion of a recycling reuse shop at the Household Waste Recycling Centre in Barry, allowing residents, particularly those suffering financial challenges, to purchase good quality recycled goods for use. The temporary extension of the current co-mingling reprocessing contract to allow for the service transition to the full recycling blueprint. And then another one that I think a few people are waiting for, a proposal to create a new household waste recycling facility at Landau, replacing the current facility, which suffers from, shall I say, poor highway access and accessibility. I think some people know exactly what I mean by that. The setting up of a £250,000 fund to support low recycling material values, with the aim that this fund be topped up to a level of 500k when material values are higher than the average price, and then used like this year on year. The report also details two significant documents. The draft waste management strategy attached at Appendix A to the report details our planned actions over the next 10 years, 2022 to 2032, and aligns with this council's corporate priorities and those of Welsh Government for recycling waste. The main principles of the strategy are: 1, the provision of curbside collection services that reduce the residual waste arisings, collect high levels of clean recyclables, and are at the lowest overall financial cost. Secondly, the collection services that are delivered in a way that helps elicit the desired behavioural changes amongst householders, whilst at the same time providing convenience. Thirdly, the provision of curbside collection services that can provide source segregated food wastes to anaerobic digestion facilities that produce renewable energy and soil fertiliser. And fourthly, the provision of well-signed, equipped and staffed household waste recycling centres that enable as many people as possible to access facilities for recycling as wide a range of materials as possible. It is proposed that, subject to the strategy to the consultation by the relevant scrutiny committee and the public, that should Cabinet agree its detail in principle. At the completion of 12 weeks, the statutory consultation would then be returned to Cabinet for consideration of the comments and final agreement. Appendix B of the report features a detailed 10-year business plan that supports the strategy. This plan includes a £1.4 million cost pressure for 22-23, and that has now been allocated the base budget, and it's proposed that this plan be reviewed and updated annually depending on the previous year's performance and any legislative changes. And Appendix C to the report details the environmental impact assessments for the changes proposed. That concludes my summary, and I hope you will agree with me this is the most comprehensive report aimed at building on past successes and retaining the Council's position as one of the best recycling authorities in Europe. Now, I'm not going to jump straight onto taking you through the recommendation in case you would want to make any comments. And I may have provoked a comment from one of my cabinet colleagues by something I said earlier.
I think you might have done something to do with Landau. Councillor Eddie Williams.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor King. Yes, let's be frank now. The whole report is fabulous, isn't it? It's a 10-year strategy, and the Vale has got a lot. It is performing such a well thing. From my own, as you know, when we brought in a new waste management system, the Western Vale provided a few lessons to learn, didn't they? So that was useful. And but even so, we're in a great place. And I do hear from local residents that it's a fabulous system we've got. So I do hope it moves forward to the other half of the Vale of Glamorgan. The recycling centres, we know that you've got a challenge down in Barry at the moment. We thought we were going to have this up and running already, but the environmental changes that we're going through has increased the costs and therefore is a challenge. And I don't think people recognise that. Just for us to put a couple of containers at an end of a slipway, we think we just throw things in. We've got more regulations and requirements to fulfil, so therefore it becomes much more difficult. That said, Landau, you can't go without saying they've waited in the Western Vale for quite some time. I'm hoping by the end of this 10-year strategy, we do have a new centre in Landau. I'm certainly sure that local residents down this end of the Vale will be pressing for that in the coming years. So okay. I won't say any more.
Good, thank you. And I don't know whether at his background he's got a bee or a wasp attacking him.
It's the biggest bee I've seen. I don't know. It's about the size of a small bomber, I think.
I could see you flinching, and I thought it came from the flowers behind you. But there you are. Okay. The very comprehensive report. It is great what we've done, but there's a long way to go, and we really do need to get that transfer station up and running, which is the reason we put all our money into the capital programme this year, and we've taken it out of the general funding order for us to make sure that we do it. And I hope it will get done sooner rather than later, which then will allow us to roll out the recycling in the Eastern Vale. Okay.
I think I need to take you through the 11 recommendations, Leader, as you'd expect for a 10-year plan. There is a lot to agree to today. Okay. So if I may, first of all, that Cabinet approved the business plan, the revised staffing structure detailed within the report. Then secondly, that Cabinet approved the proposal detailed within the report to retain Cowbridge Compost as an additional recycling processing facility. 3, that delegated authority is granted to the Director of Environment and Housing in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood Services and Transport and the Monitoring Officer / Head of Legal and Democratic Services and the Head of Finance to extend the current contract with Cowbridge Compost on similar terms and conditions for a period of up to 6 months from the 1st of April this year. 4thly, that delegated authority is granted to the Director of Environment and Housing in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood Services and Transport and the Monitoring Officer / Head of Legal and Democratic Services and the Head of Finance to extend the processing of recyclable materials commingled contract on similar terms and conditions for a period of up to 6 months from April the 30th this year. That Cabinet agree the use of £250,000 from the Neighbourhood Services and Transport Reserve to establish a new materials values fund. 6thly, that the Cabinet note the budget required beyond 2024 to deliver the strategy. 7, that Cabinet agrees in principle to the replacement of the household waste recycling centre at Landau and development of Fleet Parking Atlantic Trading Estate, subject to sufficient funding being made available in the Council's capital programmes. 8, that Cabinet approve in principle the draft 10-year recycling waste management strategy 2022 to 2032, subject to the outcome of a 12-week public consultation to be undertaken in the summer of 22. And then the Cabinet, number 9, that Cabinet refers recommendation 8 above to the Scrutiny Committee, Environment and Regeneration for their consideration. 10, that the use of the urgent decision procedure as set out in section 1414 of the Council's Constitution be exercised in respect to recommendations 1, 2, 3 and 4. And finally, number 11, that Cabinet delegates authority to the monitoring officer / head of legal and democratic services to execute the agreements referred to in recommendations 3 and 4. Quite a lot.
Okay. It is quite a lot, but it's a very comprehensive plan too. I'm happy to second that. I think if everybody's happy with that, and you can keep an eye on your B. We'll move forward to the next item, which is item 15. Any items which I've decided are urgent? I have none. I have none under part 2 either. So can I thank you for your attendance and your forbearance? And I will formally close this meeting, and I will ask the officers to stop the recording and to stop the live streaming, please.